Here in the United States, there is now a confirmed case of a superbug that no antibiotic can apparently combat. A Pennsylvania woman has developed an infection that officials call, quote, a nightmare bacteria.
We take antibiotics whenever we get sick or whenever we get hurt. And ever since penicillin, the first antibiotic, was invented, millions of lives have been saved from sure death. However, a new epidemic has been on the rise, an epidemic that even this miracle drug cannot cure. And it's time we face that problem.
Ever since their discovery by Alexander Fleming, antibiotics have been used to treat a wide range of infectious diseases caused by bacteria. Unfortunately, this may not be the case anymore. According to the CDC, 23,000 people in the US die every year due to antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Even the World Health Organization has taken notice, stating that without urgent action, we are heading for a post-antibiotic era, in which common infections and minor injuries can once again kill.
If you think about it, that's actually really scary. Without antibiotics, we could be killed by any kind of infection, whether it's from surgery, a scrape on the playground, or a tiny paper cut from this book.
The antibiotic pipeline is drying up, some people say.
I think it's worse than drying up. I think
Really?
it is. I think it is terribly close to a drought. This is one of the great catastrophes of our age.
Oh boy, and disaster it is. Why? Well, if you just think about it, antibiotics are drugs that are only taken in relatively short periods of time. And from the economic standpoint of a pharmaceutical company, it just doesn't make sense to invest the time, effort, and money into a drug that people will only use up to 1 week at most.
I can make billions off cholesterol drugs, blood pressure drugs, arthritis drugs, dementia, things that I know patients are going to have to take every day for the rest of their lives. Why would I put my R&D dollars into the antibiotic division that isn't going to make me any money?
This is a timeline of antibiotic resistance. As you can see, the more we used antibiotics, the more rapidly bacteria gained resistance.
We want to stay, in the business of providing new therapeutics for the future. Our investors require that of us.
Unfortunately, the problems that have led to antibiotic resistance doesn't just end here. In fact, the problem extends as far as our agricultural practices.
Note the weight of a chicken raised for 8 weeks on a regular feed. Now another chicken nourished for the same period on regular feed plus terramycin, a 15% increase in growth.
They had discovered that if you add these drugs to the feed of animals, they were very useful in increasing the productivity of the animal. They kept them healthy. That was the main thing. They reduced loss and sicknesses in their animals. And they also discovered that it gains the same amount of weight on less feed.
Sure, antibiotics can be used to fatten up animals and keep the cost per feed down, but on the other hand, many people don't realize that antibiotic resistance is caused by such practices.
In fact, 80% of all antibiotics that are sold to the US are used for the sole purpose of fattening animals up. After the antibiotics are consumed, the livestock will excrete the antibiotics out in the form of feces. The feces will then travel off the farm as fertilizer, dust, and in water, giving all bacteria in your local environment a chance to develop resistance. But perhaps the most terrifying fact of all is that the antibiotic-resistant bacteria is probably in the food you eat. Oh ho, what a way to ruin that good old steak you're dreaming of for dinner.
We can blame antibiotic resistance on pharmaceutical companies and agricultural practices all we want, but we can't escape from reality. It's time we faced it.
Oh, I am part of the problem.
I am part of the problem.
We've been over-treating patients with antibiotics for decades. For example, patients are sometimes given antibiotics when they have symptoms of an infection before it's actually been diagnosed, so they might not get exactly the right medication. Plus, some patients will stop taking their antibiotics as soon as they start feeling better, instead of finishing the full course of the medications prescribed by their doctor, so not all of the bacteria get killed off, leaving behind only the strongest bugs to grow and reproduce.
We prescribe antibiotics 20 to 50% of the time. It's inappropriate and unnecessary.
Some doctors, I think, overprescribe, and you kind of feel that as a patient.
We have a serious problem on the patient side. We have a serious problem on the doctor side.
Which brings us to the question, what should the government do to prevent antibiotic resistance? First, the government can incentivize the production of antibiotics by offering cash prizes to pharmaceutical companies that create new antibiotics. The government can also invest more money into other research such as phage therapy, which is basically using harmless viruses to kill off bacteria. If that doesn't turn out well, the government can always invest in vaccines, which are used to prevent infections. Second, the government must control the use of antibiotics in livestock. Instead of using antibiotics, farmers should use vaccines to prevent animals from getting sick. This may sound skeptical, but it's been done in Norway. Now, Norway is the leading country in using the least amount of antibiotics in farming. In fact, they've reduced their antibiotic use to virtually zero. Third, I believe that the government needs to make the monitoring of prescriptions by hospitals and clinics mandatory.
There's clinical practice guidelines that physicians should be following to make sure that they prescribe the appropriate antibiotics.
We ought to make it mandatory. It's not an option. If you screw up and prescribe antibiotics that's inappropriate or unnecessary, it affects everyone.
There's too many different standards across the world, so international cooperation, maybe UN or WHO, something like that, that could have some standards.
We need to realize that antibiotic resistance affects everybody globally. We need to come together as a community to change our culture and how we use antibiotics. We've still got a long ways to go, but we can all take the first step to prevent antibiotic resistance, whether it's choosing to go buy healthier meat or choosing to go visit a clinic that monitors prescriptions. So I ask you, future president, to be an international leader that will inspire everyone to work together to prevent antibiotic resistance from spreading further.